I feel like gravel is a strong future for the cycling world because you can get involved in gravel for 100 different reasons. You can be someone who wants to win something, or you can be someone who's an explorer or an adventurer, or someone who's just curious or needs some sort of new kind of a challenge.
This is the How We Live podcast. My name's Patrick Van Horn, and today is really a cool day because I'm interviewing somebody who is a friend in addition to being one of our Liv Elite Ambassadors. This is Janel Spilker. How are you? It is great to see you.
It's great to see you too, Patrick. It is really exciting to be a part of the How We Live podcast too. I'm a fan, and now I get to be on the podcast. So
thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that we try to do in all of these podcasts is get to know an individual. And what's really cool about having a chance to chat with you is I've seen you ride. I've seen you compete. You are this really nice person, genuinely friendly person, and you can be a pretty ferocious competitor. I've seen you compete. Tell me about that. Tell me about competition.
I think it might have to do with being the youngest of 3 children and having to try to fill in some big shoes. My family was always very active. We weren't outwardly very competitive, but we all did sports. We were all into music and into performance and into school and doing all these things. And so there were a lot of ways to, enjoy life, and sports became a big part of my life from an early age. It was something that we did together as a family. And I can remember trying to be a really great swimmer because my mom was a swimmer, my dad was trying to be a swimmer, my sister was a swimmer, my brother was a swimmer. And so I just kind of was following in those swimming wakes. And
I see what you did there. That was awesome.
And one of my earliest memories was being in this park with my family and my aunt, my mother's little sister. And we were running around and we were playing. And my aunt looked at me and said, "Janel, I think you might be a really good runner someday." And for some reason, that's where I diverged from this path as a swimmer to being a runner. And I embraced this idea that I could be different than my older sister and my older brother, and I could have another sport to kind of pursue. So I think I must have been 8 years old at that time. And so running competitively really wasn't a part of what you did at that age.
Right.
But I tried to make everything competitive. So, if we had to do a mile run for a fitness test in elementary school, I was going for it. I can still remember the names of the kids that beat me. And it was like one boy and one girl. And I was like, okay, I'm not the fastest and I'm not the fastest girl. I got to fix that by the next time we do this test. Anyway, so competition was definitely always a part of the way that I lived, but it seemed to me kind of a healthy thing to do.
And this wasn't, you didn't grow up here in Southern California. You live here now, but you grew up where?
Mostly upstate New York, outside of Albany. I was born in Chicago, and then at the age of 6, my family moved to Albany, New York, and great place to grow up if you like seasons and you love the outdoors, and we did. So when did it translate to bicycling? When did that fire translate to biking? Really late in life, considering professional sports. So I ran all through college, and I went to a D3 school. I was there for the education, not for the athletics, but athletics was always a part of me. And I moved to San Diego for graduate school. And a few years after diving headfirst into teaching, so I had studied engineering as an undergrad and then went into teaching for graduate school. And a few years into teaching, a coworker caught me in the copy room one day, and I said, "Phyllis, I heard that you are doing a ride around Lake Tahoe as a part of a fundraising group." And she was so excited to talk to me about this team in training event where you ride around Lake Tahoe. It's called America's Most Beautiful Bike Ride.
And it is. It's a stunning bike ride.
Yeah. And I said, but Phyllis, how could I raise that much money? I've never raised, over $2,000 for a charity before. And she's like, oh, Janel, don't worry about the fundraising. We will help you. Let's just get you to the team and let's get you on a bike. And at that point I had a road bike, but I was 26 or 27 years old. I had just been commuting back and forth to work and never really ridden longer than 30 miles. And maybe had only done that once. So this was something that was intriguing to me, but I wasn't really thinking of it as a sport.
Right.
And so I started in the program, and it was amazing because I was, and I'll just say this, I really didn't know anything about road riding.
That's amazing.
I had watched the Tour de France. I didn't pay attention to women's cycling at all, but I really didn't know anything. And the program had coaches and mentors, and so every group was put together based on the pace that they could ride.
Right.
And you had a coach of that group. You had two coaches, a coach and an assistant coach of the whole program. And then these mentors that worked with every group. And oh my goodness, I feel like I hit the jackpot with the coaches, with the mentors, and every little thing that you would need to learn when you're starting to ride a road bike. I had people to ask. I could ask I could ask questions that seemed silly. And it was an encouraging and an encouraging environment to be in, and there was this immediate community, and it was also, they were incredible at I guess because the community was so strong, it became a way of life very quickly.
Right. And now we'll talk about this in a minute, but that experience obviously has translated into your life now since you've retired from racing, because you do gravel camps now, you do coaching now, and we want to get into that in just a minute. But this was a charity ride. This ride around Tahoe was not a competition. Where did that first desire to, I can be a badass on a bicycle, I think. When did that happen? And how did that happen?
Great question. Somewhere in the second half of that program, when I was really starting to figure out how the bike worked, I was fascinated with how riding a bike felt like running. You could push yourself in certain ways, but you still had to figure out how to use this machine. And at some point along that first 6 months, someone said to me, one of the coaches of this other little subset of riders who were raising money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, he said to me, his name is Perry. Perry said, Janel, we really like you, but maybe you should find some faster riders to ride with.
That's a nice thing for somebody to say.
That's right. And I was like, really? Come on. You guys are like professionals, right? I really looked at all these riders as pros. I figured they were retired pros or current pros or, really accomplished riders. And he said, well, Janel, I know a coach who's a good coach, and he coaches professional riders and has coached, riders in the Tour de France and riders who've gone to the Olympics and who've, been big in mountain biking, road riding, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, that sounds pretty cool. And so Perry coordinated a ride where I got to meet who then became my coach for my entire career, Dr. Arnie Baker. And it was just at the beginning of summer when I had wrapped up my year of teaching, because I was teaching full time at this point.
Right.
And after this first ride, Arnie said, we do a few regular rides every single Wednesday and Tuesday and Saturday and Sunday. And if you'd like to start joining us, you'd be more than welcome. And so I did. I went on every single one of his group rides that I could. And I just found myself surrounded by Olympians, national champions. People were talking about their connections to all these pro riders, and everyone was really wonderful and really encouraging. And it was that set me on this course to become a professional. Fast forward 6 months, the same coworker and friend, Phyllis, who had convinced me to join the team and training team, took me out to lunch and said, Janel, you need to hire Arnie as a coach. And I said, what does that mean? She said, well, he'll be a good coach for you and you have talent, but he's not going to call you up and say, hey, Janel, can I coach you? You have to approach him. And so even something like that, I didn't know. But after that, I went over to Arnie's house and we sat down and I asked him, Arnie, do you think I could do this for a living? Could I be a pro bike racer? And he said, Janel, I think you have world-class talent, but you may make more money working full-time at Walmart. And
boy, that had to throw a little water on the fire there just for a moment. I mean, that's pretty sobering.
It was, but I appreciate his logical and realistic approach to things, and maybe it's the engineer in me. But it definitely gave me a way to measure the decision. You know, I think that a lot of us grow up dreaming of being something bigger than life, right? You know, and for me, it was being an athlete, being a professional athlete, going to the Olympics. I mean, there's so much emotion and inspiration that comes with something like the Olympic Games. And so here I was at the age of now 27, trying to realize this dream that I had had since a very young age. And okay, I'd make more money working full-time at Walmart, but come on, let's go. Let's do this.
What was your first race, your very first race, and what do you remember about it?
I remember being very annoyed that I didn't win. My first race was about 6 weeks after hiring Arnie as a coach, and I was still working full-time.
6 weeks after you've got a full-time coach now. That seems, to me, a little soon.
Yeah, but I was apparently still disappointed in my, 5th place or whatever place I finished in this criterium. But I did a LA crit. I don't remember exactly which one it was. Oh, yes, I do. Dominguez Hills criterium. There's no hills in this criterium, but I did an excellent 2-lap lead out for whoever won that thing. And then, it was, this was 2007, and that first few months, I did every single race that I could possibly get to. And when there weren't any more races happening on a regular basis in Southern California, I went to the Northeast and stayed with my parents and did some racing. Then I went up to Northern California and stayed with my brother and did some racing. And I was committed. I mean, maybe a little bit crazier than doing my first race 6 weeks after hiring a coach. I had already given my notice at work and told them I was going to be a pro cyclist. And so at the end of the school year, I wouldn't be coming back full time. And it coincided, this is also crazy when I look back on it, it coincided with them announcing that I was going to be a director of one of the new schools that we were opening. And I had been working on that project for a year and a half. And so they had already slated me as a director and I already had the contract. The day that they announced it to the entire staff, I told them that I was going to be resigning. So, and that was before my first race. I was committed.
You were all in. When you made this decision, I'm going to be a pro racer, you were all in. And it was not like, I got this fallback thing I can go back to. What was the first race you won? Do you remember that? The first race where you're on the top step?
I think so. So there's a race in East San Diego County called the Boulevard Road Race. And everyone had told me that it would be a good race for me, and because it includes a lot of climbing. And you basically have a few miles, I can't remember if it's 4 miles, finishing climb. And I had done the race in early February because it's one of the first road races of the year. And I had gotten disqualified, which was a huge disappointment. I'd crossed the double yellow lines. I had a very amateur moment or a newbie moment. I looked at this crack between the yellow lines, suddenly was fearful that I was going to, get swallowed up by this crack, crossed the double yellow lines, and the referee had deemed that I was advancing position. So I was disqualified, and I was so frustrated. But it was a part of an omnium later in the season. And so I went back, and I knew I wasn't going to cross the double yellow lines. I knew the course well.
You knew the course. That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, it is. And I there were some strong riders in the group, and I just remember there was a climb before the final climb, and I just started I started increasing the pace and just kind of pushing it a little bit. And I thought, okay, I'll throw in a little attack. And I did, and there were some people kind of clinging on and maybe looking like they were going to come back. And I thought I better keep putting in some surges until no one's left and see how this goes. And was able to ride in solo. So it was really exciting.
What was that feeling like when you knew you were coming across the finish line and this was your first race you were winning? What's that feeling like? I mean, are you looking around wondering, is this really me? Or are they going to DQ me again? Did I do something wrong? What's that like?
I think I was a little bit worried. I'm like, okay, just contain the excitement. Keep going until you cross that line and make sure, don't get too excited. But I was filled with, I think, some relief and then tons of joy. It was the wins, and it was true of that first win, and it was true of wins and performances for many, many years throughout my whole career. There was always something bigger about the win than just me and that performance and crossing the line. It was thinking about the sacrifices that people were making, or that they were making around me, for me to be able to do that, the commitment of other people, the excitement about the future. It was big. I think as athletes, we often can be very hard on ourselves, and to get a little reminder every once in a while that you are on the right track, and that you are, that all the sacrifices are worth it. That you need those little reminders, and wins are something that really fuel the fire.
When was your first European race? You were now racing in California. You've gone to the Northeast. You've raced there. When was your first race in Europe?
The very next year.
Wow.
So yeah, I went that first year. I finished up and was able to guest ride for a pro team, Webcor Pro Cycling, and got a contract with them for 2008. And it was an Olympic year, and they were a UCI team for that year. So I went into that year with the big goal for me was earning a spot on the European squad. And at the first big race of the year, Redlands Classic, I broke my collarbone while I was solo off the front of the race. I mean, nobody's fault but my own.
Oh, gosh.
And I had remembered, in that race, I was riding really well, and I was thinking to myself, I think that this is going to be a European-worthy performance. And then I broke my collarbone. But that summer, I did make the squad. And so I went over for a stage race in Germany, and it was just 3 weeks or maybe 2.5 weeks or so before the start of the Olympic Games in Beijing. So there were riders there who were on the form of their life, like the best women in the world, and they were ready for the biggest prize in the world, the Olympics. And one of my favorite moments or memories from that race was on the second stage. So the first stage, the team director, Karen Brems, had said, okay, Janel, you can just adjust, like get used to the peloton, get used to going from the back to the front. We need to count on you for doing work for us, but this is your first race here. Just focus on movement in the peloton. Turned out to be pretty challenging. The roads are a lot different in Europe. The peloton's a lot different. But by stage 2, she apparently thought I could handle it. And so I had some responsibilities early on to be covering the moves so that my teammates who were the experienced ones, the Olympic bound athletes, so that they could, kind of relax in the peloton and I could handle the big workload. It required getting to the front, which was still a challenge. Anyway, so there I was. I'm like, okay, I need to be at the front. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to the front. And I'm going up the side of the peloton. I knocked bars with someone and then just kept going along my merry way, going up to the front, and I found myself on the front. And there I was, just so happy with myself. And all of a sudden, I felt a very strong presence next to me. And I look over, and it is Judith Arendt, who is an incredible bike racer. Yep. And she said to me in English, which I was very thankful for, but with her German accent, "Excuse me, can you please be careful?" And I said, "Oh yes, Judith, yes, I will be very careful. I'm so sorry." And it was, she could have, given me an earful for almost crashing people out, because obviously I had done something dangerous. But she didn't. She asked me to please be careful. And I was forever thankful for that moment where it was a really good learning experience for me. What was
the high point of your European racing career? What was the key moment?
Good question. The following year, 2009, I had a couple of good races. It was my first time doing the Spring Classics. I had a decent race at Flèche Wallonne. I was in the top 20, and it was I don't think they were called World Cups at that point. Maybe they were. I can't remember. But, Flèche Wallonne's a big one. And first, that was a race where it just felt so easy for me. And I was still so new to it all, but it just all clicked. I can remember, at some point early in that race that we were finally able to see this breakaway that was up the road. And the only thing that stood between us and the breakaway was one of the climbs. And I said in the radio to my team director, "Hey, can I try to go get the break? Can I go bridge up?" And one of my teammates got on the radio and she goes, laughing, "Janel, if you can go catch him, go for it." And I did. And Ina Teutenberg and Amber Neben and Anoni Wood, who was leading the World Cup at that point, they all went with me. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Mariana Voss, who's now a CCC live rider. So I was one of those moments where I look around, I'm like, okay, Janel, you bring your A game.
Yeah, this is big time.
Right. So that was one of those first moments where I was like, okay, I'm starting to get this. And then over the years, there were moments like that. I loved racing over there, but I never based fully out of Europe, and I think that was something that a lot of Americans were still trying to figure out how to manage racing in the U.S. and racing in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And you were doing that too? Were you going back and forth, or were you mostly in Europe at that point?
I was going back and forth, and 6 weeks here, 6 weeks there. I'd be over in Europe, sometimes for longer periods of time. But I never based full time in Europe. And, now I think we can see that the riders who commit to being in Europe full time are the ones who are able to have more success. You have more exposure to the differences in racing. It doesn't feel so foreign, for lack of a better word. And it just becomes, the normal style of racing for you.
Did it ever get to be a grind? Because it's hard. It's a season where you're traveling, your body is on the rivet at all time. The chances of getting a cold are really, really good because you're watching your nutrition, you're watching your weight, you're exhausted all the time. Did it ever get to be such a grind that you thought, wow, this is not what I bargained for?
There was one spring where I had, I think that I had raced Omloop at Nieuwsblad, which just happened this past weekend, or whatever Spring Classic was this past weekend, I can't remember, where I raced that and had a very silly crash. And I think I broke a bone in my hand, but it was one of those broken bones that you could still race with. Right. But it made braking a little bit more difficult. And for the next 6 weeks or so, I basically had a crash in every race because I couldn't brake. And there was one race in particular that was in the Netherlands, and it was an incredibly cold day, and I think I crashed 4, 5, 6 times. And finally, after a huge one, I wasn't able to chase back on, and I just rolled right to the hotel. and called it a day. And I was like, okay, this is it. I can't do it anymore. I haven't finished a single one of these races that I've started. I need a reset. And I went in, we had one more race on the calendar that was in Italy, and I did it, and I didn't crash, so I considered that a win. And then I had about a 3-week break. And so I flew to Girona, and I had some downtime, and I got to train, and I got to just be in that atmosphere and kind of have a little home away from home for just a few weeks. And my very next race was Flanders. And I remember going to Flanders and thinking, it's going to be a good day. And while we were rolling out neutral, neutral is sometimes you're flying down these roads. And I'm thinking, this is easy. And it was one of those effortless days. So yeah, there are times where there were moments where it became a grind. And sometimes you just needed to find a reset, and then things were all systems go again.
Can you point to the biggest moment? What was the best moment of your pro career?
Oh, that's tough. Towards the end of my career, I really developed a love for the team time trial. It was reintroduced into the World Championships in 2014, and no, I take that back, 2013. And so we were training for the team time trial, and it was such a cool discipline. It was something that wasn't involved in the women's side of the sport that often. And so we really worked on it as a team, and it reminded me of training on the tandem with my coach Arnie, because suddenly you are not just giving this performance for yourself. I mean, sure, cycling is a team sport, right? Everything is about the team. But on a tandem or in the team time trial, it is so much more obvious that your performance is affecting the team immediately, every second. You are accountable every single millisecond. And 2013, I would say we had a respectable performance, but I think we left a lot on the table at Worlds that year. And the following year, we just were dialed. We made each other hurt a lot in training. And when we got to Worlds, it was in Ponferrada, Spain that year, we were ready. We were all so focused on this race, and we missed the podium by 6 seconds. And so it wasn't a win, but it was such an incredible way to cap off the season, with 5 other teammates and with our directors and our mechanic, and this performance that depended on the team working together so tightly, set as a dialed, machine. It was probably one of the highlights for sure. Your pro career started a little later than for most people. You were 27, I think, and that was this was in 2007 when you started your pro career. First pro contract was at the end of 2007, so 2008, and I think my racing age that year was 28. And how long did it last? How long did you race? When did you retire? I retired in 2015, so I think just under 10 years full time. And it was earlier than I was originally planning on retiring, but it turned out to be the right time. And I had evolved. I think 2011 was probably arguably my most successful season in terms of wins and that sort of thing. But 2014 had been incredibly rewarding because of the team time trial. And when I retired, it was like I was ready to stop focusing on myself. And I had been coaching through my career, just a few athletes. And suddenly I found I was riding for a different reason. And I really enjoyed, stop focusing on the numbers and the intervals and the training volume and having everything so fine-tuned for me. And I was able to just go out and ride with my athletes and my friends. And it turned out to be the right time for me. Can you, well, let's get into coaching now, but just before we do that and get into your gravel camp, but just before we do that, can you just ride to have fun? I mean, I've seen you on a bike now, and it seems like when you're riding with our retailers, when you're riding with folks here
at the office? It seems like you're just having fun. It doesn't seem like you're thinking in the back of your mind, oh boy, these people are really slow. I wish I could pick the pace up.
I think I only ride for fun. And that's the thing is that, and I don't know if it's because I started as a recreational cyclist doing fundraising, but the joy in it for me is so much about the people. And it's great. There's these side effects of cycling. You have your health, you have some goals to shoot for, you have something to motivate you. There's all these great side effects of cycling, but to me, the main purpose is the people. So yeah, I think I really only ride for the fun. So
let's talk about gravel. Let's talk about gravel camp. You are an ambassador for Liv, and you get to choose a lot of different bikes to ride, from which to ride. You're on the Avail. You are on the Avail all-rounder. You're also on the Langma, and I think you also ride one of the mountain bikes, the Intrigue. That's sort of your go-to mountain bike.
So I've got two mountain bikes. I've got the Peak 2.9. And I have an Intrigue E.
Oh, so the Intrigue E.
And I'm 100% on the e-bike bus for sure. And happy to talk about that too.
Okay, so let's get into gravel. Why gravel? And tell us about your gravel camp. And just by way of those folks who are watching who want to find out more about this, janelcycling.com, right? JANEL cycling.com.
That's right. You can find out information about camps that I do and this gravel camp.
Why gravel?
Gravel was, I think, a key to my success in retirement. I had some friends who were retired pros and were dabbling in gravel. And one of them said, hey, Janel, you got to come do this Dirty Kansas thing. And I said, Neil, that is 200 miles. I do not want to do a double century, and I don't want to do it on gravel. But a lot of these friends are persuasive. And so in retirement, I started to I had already started to ride on the dirt more. It was an opportunity to ride the mountain bike without risk of injury. And in road racing, we were riding on dirt all the time. So call it dirt, call it gravel. But we had already been doing that. And so I would always ride the dirt in training. And so whether it was on a 23 wide tire or 25 or 28, I was already riding gravel roads on a road bike. So I got into gravel mainly to try to check Dirty Kansas 200 off my bucket list, and I fell in love with gravel. I think I fell in love with the challenge, but I really fell in love with the community. It was it was racing, it was challenging, but it could also just be an enjoyable day out on the bike and connecting with people.
Yeah.
And so, gravel's really taken off in the past few years. When I retired, I also started coaching a road camp in Borrego Springs that we fondly call #Borrego Camp. So I knew that I love camps. So as soon as I started working with Liv, I said, we have got to do a gravel camp. And I want to do a women's gravel camp, and I want to do a men's and women's gravel camp, because I feel like gravel is a strong future for the cycling world, because you can get involved in gravel for 100 different reasons. You can be someone who wants to win something, or you can be someone who's an explorer or an adventurer, or someone who's just curious or needs some sort of new kind of a challenge. And so yeah, we started talking about doing a gravel camp right when I started my partnership with Liv, and this year it's happening. So this first camp is called Out There, presented by Liv and Giant, because when I first went to recon the routes with my partner Eric, we were on dirt bikes. And we just kept on stopping and looking around and thinking, holy cow, we are out there. And it was clear that we needed to get people there on bikes. And so that's the plan.
So where is this riding? This is in the Sierra. This is some spectacular scenery, some spectacular areas in the Sierra, and it's pretty high too. It's pretty high.
Yeah. We don't, stay above 9,000 feet much, but we will touch it and maybe get above. So the camp starts in Lone Pine, California, and Lone Pine, for anyone who's an outdoor enthusiast, you may recognize the name of that town because it's the easiest way to climb Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in the lower 48 states. So we'll start in Lone Pine, and then we leave, and we are gone. We will be heading east towards Death Valley, and we are going to hit some sandy roads, some gravel roads. We're going to go through mining towns, ghost towns, and the first day is a point-to-point ride. We are going to stay in an incredibly remote place on the second night of the camp, so after the first ride. And then we'll be riding back towards Lone Pine on the second day and on some more roads that you just can't believe are there. I mean, you develop such a respect for humans that to think that these places were the hotbed of mining over 100 years ago, and you can't imagine how humans could survive out there. And yet you can still see the paths that they walk to get up these mines that are thousands and thousands of feet above these gravel roads. We go through a town that, I'm not kidding you, on the town sign says population 50 or so. Like it is so cool. And then it's just Joshua trees and these granite peaks and this terrain that even with all my outdoor adventuring, I would have never thought possible. And we'll get to do it all on bikes.
And is this bike packing? Is this supported? Where are you staying in the evenings?
Good question. So it's all fully supported. We are going to have some incredible mechanics from Giant and Liv who are going to be out there supporting us, and they will be able to drive most of the roads that we're on, but not all of them. So no need for a backpack, no need for carrying everything with you. We've got you. And we're going to have a chef with us because when you get out there, you need to make sure you're fed well.
Gotta eat.
That's right. So fully supported. We'll have some incredible coaches that are going to be along for the ride, and we'll be able to capture it all. Will Matthews, the photographer, will be out for the trip, and it's gonna be an incredible adventure.
That sounds like a terrific adventure. JanelCycling.com, and this is in October 1st through the 4th.
That's right.
Okay. Real quick, I'm going to let you go because I've kept you a lot longer than I intended to. How do you like the Intrigue? Tell me about mountain biking, mountain biking.
I am on board with e-bikes. Oh my goodness. I love my Intrigue E. It is, I can't say it's my favorite bike, but I think it is the bike that is the most surprising to me. It's a great all mountain bike. So I feel like I can ride it on anything. Over the past 2.5 years, I've gotten into motorcycles and riding dirt bikes mostly. And I feel like it is the perfect bike to take out on the trails to get a feel to how to ride technical terrain. So you can ride up things that you would never be able to ride without a motor, and you can ride down things in such you can ride more technical terrain. It's that you figure out how to carry momentum with it, and then you can also the whole idea with e-bikes, you can go further, you can go faster.
Exactly.
You can ride more. You can ride with a wider range of people. If I go out for a mountain bike ride with Eric, I can actually keep up with him more or less. So it's amazing. I love e-bikes, and I've ridden the Thrive as well, and I've ridden the Amity, and if I had room in my garage, I would find an excuse to get one of those too.
Janel, it has been awesome having you here today and having a chance to chat with you. I've known you now for, I think, probably about a year, and this is the first chance I've really had to sit down and talk with you. And so thanks for being here. Thanks for telling folks on the How We Live podcast how you live. That's pretty awesome.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been a joy.